And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this webinar today. My name is Michael Farnham, CTO with Set Solutions. Again, appreciate you joining us. We're going to be having a dual presentation today with IronNet and one of our guys here at Set Solutions. So quick, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So along with this webinar, with your registration, you should have received a gift card for lunch today. If you did not get that, please contact Lauren Lynch. She should be the one. You should have her contact info because she's the one that sent out all the emails. So please get with her and get that. We can get that taken care of for you. At the end of today's presentation, soon after, you will be getting a survey. If you answer that, you will be entered into a drawing to get a $100 Amazon gift card. So we don't, the odds are pretty high that you can win that. So we'd really appreciate you filling that out and getting in the running for that $100 Amazon gift card from IronNet. And today, as we go through the presentation, you will have, you should have an option for a Q&A panel down in the bottom of the Zoom window. If you can use that to ask any questions you have, we'll be answering those generally at the end. If something comes up that we think is really good and we want to ask John or Hutch a question during the middle of the presentation, we'll do that. But generally we'll be saving those all the way to the end. So please enter those questions anytime during the presentation and the Q&A panel. So without further ado, let me introduce our two presenters today. So first of all, we're going to have John Ford, who is one of the cyber strategists with IronNet. He's going to be doing the main part of the presentation. And then soon after right when he gets done, following him up, we'll have Justin Hutchins, AKA Hutch, who's our consulting services practice lead. He will be talking about tabletop exercises and how that can really benefit you as an organization. So without further ado, I will turn this over to John.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your day. We definitely greatly appreciate it. And thanks to all the folks at Set Solutions for the partnership and setting this up. So real quick, my name is John Ford, as Michael said. I've been with IronNet since the beginning of the year. Pretty lengthy history in security, going over 20 years. Variety of roles, government space, vendor space. I've been the CISO of a couple of healthcare companies. Have my own company, and I'm very happy to be with IronNet, joining the mission, of collective defense. So. Great topic today. This is one that comes up more and more, obviously, as we get close to the election. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, really what's going on in the COVID world and how much some of the big actors, have upstaged or what they're up to. And really, setting the stage for that. COVID has been something, that has many impacts. It's surprising for me anyway, being in the business as long as I've been in, is really how fast both nation state and other actors pivoted and are having an impact, particularly in healthcare, but other industries as well. So let me first start by the big four nation state adversaries that we have. But please note that these nation state adversaries have many proxies. These are organized criminal groups that operate also independently. And I'm also going to talk about, insider threat as well. So a little bit towards the end of this part of it. But I wanted to really, talk about what's going on right now. And we have a perfect storm between the election coming and as we're getting closer down the road, to vaccine development. So I want to start with China. China, it should be no surprise to anybody on this call. They've been attacking our research organizations for years. This isn't, COVID-19 didn't change their methodology so much. It did change their velocity and volume. But their goal has always been to basically steal trade secrets and monetize or take advantage of those trade secrets for the benefit of the Chinese folks, as well as the countries that they're trying to do bolster up their position with as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So, with China, China's kind of like a unique case. And so while we've seen a tremendous amount of attacks coming at our research organizations, you will see some ransomware coming out of China, particularly targeted more to slow things down, maybe on the US side. But the reality is their biggest goal, their biggest motivation is to really understand what we're up to. So in the case of a vaccine development, this is really, for the folks on the call, this is no different really than the space race. There is a tremendous amount of benefit to the country or countries that come up with a vaccine, right? Currently, there are eight entities that are developing COVID vaccines. 4 of them are in China, 3 in the US, 1 in Australia. China just announced this past week that they believe they're, closing in on finishing up phase 3 clinical trials, and they believe that they will have a vaccine soon. Make no mistake, the first country to come up with a viable vaccine is going to yield and wield a tremendous amount of power. They will be able to deliver the vaccines to the countries they want, not deliver to the countries they don't. This really is a very important thing of national pride for whoever comes out with it. And so for the US and for China, this is very, very, very important. China's motivation, and from what it appears that they're a little bit ahead of us at this point, but they also know that perhaps maybe if their vaccine doesn't work, they are going to continue to hammer away at our research organizations in any way possible, so that they can understand better what we're doing and maybe take advantage of some advances that we make. So China, China is very much probably the number one player that we're dealing with right now, both geopolitically, vaccine development, disruption, for our research organizations, disruption in other areas that might slow down things like testing or antibody research. So China's definitely the big one of the 4. Moving on from them, Russia's been very interesting in that, this notification came out probably about a month ago now, and it was kind of surprising to a lot of people because Russia really is not known for their COVID development, for their vaccine development. And their motivations, tend to be a little bit different. So even though they did announce this week also that they were trying to develop a vaccine, I don't believe, most of the big players in the world believe that or believe that they're far enough along. Their particular group, APT29, which has been involved for years and years on, geopolitical espionage, is really like an interesting play that all of a sudden that they would pivot and look to pharma and research organizations. Whether it's consensus or not, I'm not so sure. Maybe a lot of our folks in the IC community may have a better idea, but it appears more likely that Russia's goal, and we'll see this down the road when I talk about elections, is much more about disruption, confusion, and maybe some sort of monetization, anything to slow down the game for the United States. But they are very active. They're very organized, and and they there's no reason to believe that whether it's China or the US that comes out with a vaccine that they would at all slow down and stop. So, just with those 2 countries alone, and if you think about what's going on and how we are trying with Operation Warp Speed here in the US with the 3 firms that we're trying to develop a vaccine on, that, these particular firms are probably dealing with everything they have to try to protect themselves and, defend themselves against really, existential threats coming out of these 2 countries alone. Next up, I'll talk a little bit about Iran. Iran is Similar to Russia in a sense, that their goals are anything that would discredit, slow down the United States, anything that they could do, to basically deny us the ability to, come first to this race, right? They're not going to be, it's not widely believed that they will be developing vaccines that could be distributed. China nor Iran really has the manufacturing and distribution capability for that. But they would certainly jump in the game for anything that they could do to make sure that the United States does not come out a winner in this regard. They're very interesting in how they operate with proxies, and they're very, very capable. So it wouldn't surprise me if in the waning days, as we get closer to a developed vaccine, or as we get closer to the election, that they launch some very sophisticated campaigns that are beyond what they're doing today, and they may even collaborate with other adversaries. So that's pretty much what we would expect to see out of Iran. And then obviously the last of the big four, our friends in North Korea, they're a little bit easier to figure out. Their motivation has been and continues to be financially motivated, such that they can finance any of the campaigns that they want. And so basically, we'll see them, really directing large-scale phishing attacks, business email compromise, ransomware, things that they can do to ultimately monetize and finance items of their goals. They look at COVID as an opportunity, like the other three to do as well, is if they can create enough chaos and disruption that it'll yield an opportunity for them to really cover their goals. So these folks have been at it again. None of these adversaries are brand new to our game. All of them have taken advantage of COVID-19 in some respects, and and we'll see them in different aspects. But on the high side with China, there's no denying what they're after, and on the low side with North Korea, there's no doubt what they're after. The two countries in the middle are a little bit more wanton, if you will, and they appear to be have various motivations. So we think it's again, this is going to continue, and firms are going to really have to have their guards up and be able to detect on these campaigns that we know are going to increase, at least over the next few months. So outside of the big four, we start to look at criminal organizations like organized crime, and then we even start to look at insider threat. And to me, like my experience in healthcare, and by the way, this is not a knock on any healthcare organization, but it really has to do with mission. I've always found that the closer you get to where healthcare is delivered, predominantly maybe the spend isn't as great. So for instance, health plans that are very well funded probably spend more money on cybersecurity than a local hospital. And it makes perfect sense. A local hospital is there to deliver care for their patients. They're not trying to be a cybersecurity organization. But this is the world where these cyber criminals live, and this is the world where there's a lot of pent-up demand, to create fear and chaos, and to ensure that ransomware being the predominant vector, that ransom gets paid, right? So we've all seen lately with like Maze ransomware attacks where they're not just encrypting the data, they're going right for, hey, we're going to sell it, we're going to make it publicly available. I've listened for over the past 2 years, listened to people in our government and others abroad, particularly in law enforcement, where the guidance has been not to pay ransom. But when you're a healthcare organization and you have zero access to a healthcare record and you have a patient, on a table, you need to deliver care to that patient. So, healthcare in particular has always been a place where ransomware really needs to be considered, right? As far as paying the ransom, if that's the quickest way to get access to care back, there's decisions there that have to be made that go beyond what we would normally want to do or think about doing. And when you look at what's happening now, you know, the folks like, when you look at like the latest ransomware events, people are paying quicker, either because of an access to care issue or because of the release of the data that would, certainly do the more damage than paying, a value of ransom. And make no mistake, these folks really understand the business that they're in when they execute ransomware attacks. They have a fair idea, particularly in healthcare, of what that's going to cost an organization. And they can make a compelling case to say, what you're going to pay in ransom is less than you would pay out externally, right? So this is not me advocating, or certainly not IronNet or anybody else advocating the payment, but what it really highlights is that these people have done their research and they kind of know where these threats lie, and they kind of know the impact to the organizations. So, two cases in particular, Parkview out in Colorado, both of these next two are out in Colorado. And Parkview, I think was back, it was back in April. They, interesting thing with them, they were completely down, and that was like a large scale ransomware attack. And it was like really compelling to see that, they were down for several days, right? The next one, also in Colorado, they lost 5 years of medical records, and they were fortunate enough to be able to bring back some copy from an older system, not from the system that they were operating from, to get back to some level of operation. But, if you think about in healthcare, like I just had a procedure done a few months ago and really paid attention to how much they depend upon that medical record being available. And I would ask everybody when they came in, hey, if that shuts down, if that workstation shuts down, you got a paper backup? And every nurse I spoke to said, I don't think so. So, we are very highly dependent upon, the healthcare system that we're in. And so it's not just that the big four are out there banging away, with their motivations. We have organized crime, we have smaller actors, and I'm pretty sure everybody on this call knows that, ransomware is probably as close to a perfect business model as you can get. There's a low barrier of entry, high gain, right? Full 7x24 support, low competition, low risk of getting caught. I myself, in my last role prior to IronNet, we actually saw a campaign going out where somebody had basically pilfered all of the credentials of a managed service provider that was supporting healthcare clinics, and they were selling it on the underground. We watched as somebody purchased that. We tried to purchase it, but we watched somebody who acquired that for $300 in Bitcoin, and a week later was paid $150K in ransom. So, if you don't think that this is a lucrative business, it's very, very lucrative. And, we have to really keep our guards up. This one scares me. Ransomware is not going anywhere. It's not going out of business. This one scares me more because it gets closer to the access to care. And there's a lot of organizations that need the help of the people on this call to really help them protect their environments, right? The last thing I'll talk about before we pivot a little bit here is insider threat. And this one happened several months ago, but there was a PPE provider, disgruntled employee, left the company, still had domain access, created a second account, and really just messed up the entire order shipment of PPE that was desperately needed to go to hospitals and first responders to take care of the influx at the height of what COVID was experiencing here in the U.S. So delivered to hospitals, clinics, and first responders, and that's, that was like super disturbing, right? To see that. But even insider threat is changing. I just read something, in the last few days, not related to healthcare, but you can Google this if you haven't read it. There was a set of criminals, cyber criminals in Russia, very well organized. They ended up contacting an employee who worked for Tesla. And apparently there was a common person between the attackers and the employee at Tesla. And while the specific details are kind of weak, they basically convinced this employee of Tesla to take a meeting with them in person. So the Russian operative, if you will, came to the U.S., met this person in San Francisco, and basically came clean. Said, "Hey, we want to execute a ransomware attack on Tesla. We think we'll get 4 million. We'll give you $1 million." And thankfully, this employee played along long enough to contact the FBI and continue the conversation where he wanted upfront money. And the Russians were not about that, but they did agree to an escrow account, and played it along long enough to where the FBI could physically arrest this individual, right? And so we think about ransomware as being executed from afar and how easy it is, but then you think about scenarios like this where, would it be unlikely, or has it happened in the past, have some of the large ransomware attacks that we've seen been executed in this manner, where it's not operated from afar through business email compromise or RDP, credentials, but actually through leveraging an inside person in an organization to flip and take the money, right? That's kind of scary. So we're in we're in a unique environment right now, and healthcare in particular is getting slammed, and so it's I don't think I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I think it's going to take a collective set of abilities for us to join forces against these adversaries. I don't think any of us can really defend in isolation against these adversaries. And I think we're going to have to pivot and really create an inflection point, some of which I know, Hutch is going to talk about in a little bit here. So, from a virus perspective, pretty much what we see going on, I could probably go a whole lot deeper on the big four, but I know we have a limited amount of time, and I kind of want to pivot a little bit over to our upcoming election. And, on the outset, it might seem like these two are completely unrelated, but I want to draw some parallels, and this is really just for your mind share of thought. But in a sense, while the motivations do vary by country, they're really not that far apart, right? So, we should assume that, when we look at what China's doing, is going to be different than what Russia's doing, right? So just like, what China would like to accomplish for vaccine research is to steal all of our intellectual property, right? And then monetize that and be first to the game. Russia really would like that information so that they can create misinformation campaigns, and they can confuse us here in the United States. Well, it's the same thing with the elections, right? China, really, what their motivation is economic, political, and personal relationship building, right? What they're trying to do is to basically leverage attacks during this election season. They're definitely after the infrastructure. There's no doubt about that. But they're after the infrastructure because they want information. Yeah, they'll probably, try to do something with the infrastructure to make it unavailable. But really what they're trying to do in their campaigns is to better their economic and political position and capital within our country. and doing that through groups. Like I just recently read that they reached out to like a farming association in Des Moines, Iowa, and I would have never thought that. But they're trying to really, push forward their own agenda through various campaigns that that they're executing. If you contrast that to Russia, Russia wants chaos, right? Russia, Iran, and North Korea would love nothing more for us to arrive at November 3rd with complete lack of confidence in the results of this election. And China likely would as well. And so, it's interesting that when you look at it from both a healthcare and from a election perspective, the agendas really aren't all of that. They're really not all that different, right? And how we deal with them are different, right? Russia's very, very sophisticated in misinformation campaigns. I mean, they reached in the 2016 election, they reportedly reached 126 million Facebook accounts. That was 2016. They're far more sophisticated today. There's no knowledge of whether those how much of that 126 million Facebook accounts, bought into what they saw from those campaigns. But the reality is they have a very, very large footprint, and their goal, and their entire goal, is really nothing more than to create chaos as we lead up to the election. If they could combine that with chaos around vaccine development, vaccine effectiveness, should the U.S. come out with a vaccine before China, and they can somehow create confusion around what the results are, that would be perfect. That would support their mission, very much so. So while these two scenarios don't seem very connected, they actually are, and really protecting one may in fact help the other, right? So when we look at Russia, there's a zero-sum game with them. They don't win just by getting information. They only win when we lose. And China, and Iran is the same way, and North Korea is similar. China, wins through political capital, right? So, it's really, a different game. But if we can protect some of our critical infrastructure, include like healthcare one, but even outside of healthcare, the more we actually protect there, the less access that these folks have to information to create misinformation campaigns. Yes, they can probably create it, but as most of you on this call probably know, that the best, misinformation campaigns take some truth and then they mix it with some untruth, right? Nobody's going to believe the wildly crazy stuff that's not true, but they will believe the ones that are, mixed in truth. So, so we've got, a lot on our hands here in this country, and in the next couple of months here, I think it's going to be, very, very interesting. As I dial this back and I look at, our mission at IronNet, what we're doing for our customers, what we're doing for, customers abroad, we do believe in collective defense, and we have solutions for that. That's something you folks can look at on our website. But one of the other things too is in this time of uncertainty, and really, what Set Solutions does very well, and I want to highlight this, is very important that during this time that, I don't care if you're in healthcare or, energy or any other industry, it's very important that we understand that these campaigns that are coming to us from these adversaries, they're very widely distributed, and when they impact an organization, they don't just impact the security team. A very serious ransomware attack on a vaccine development company or a major hospital, right, involves not just IR people from that organization. It involves people that are taking, that are providing care to patients. It involves the people who are designing vaccines, right? It involves a lot of folks in the organization. And because of that, we think one of the first steps and one of the best steps to do, like in the here and now, is to take, pump the brakes a little bit. And if you haven't done so, take a step back and go through some of these scenarios that might impact you, right? So I'll give you one. In the UK, there was a hospital that was undergoing an expansion. So a construction firm was building a new wing onto this hospital. And this just happened a few months back. That construction firm was targeted by one of these foreign adversaries, right? And they were able to get not only the construction plans, but they were able to get all of the telecommunications plans for this new wing. And, with clear intent that, hey, when this hospital wing opens, we're going to own the network, right? So sometimes we don't think that our supply chain is really vulnerable, right? And the good thing about this organization is, one, they found it, but two, sometimes you have to pump the brakes and say, like, what kind of an exercise do I need to do to really understand what kind of threats are really facing my organization and what impacts they have, not just to my organization, but maybe to our sectors as a whole. And, what I love, what Set Solutions is doing is, when you do these tabletop exercises, they're just a wonderful vehicle to getting line of sight across your entire organization, along with buying and planning on what to do next. So with that, I don't want to take up too much time. I want to get it over to Justin here, but I want to thank you. I'll take any questions as we get close to the end here, but thank you again for your time today. And Justin, I'll just turn this over to you.
Hey, John, really appreciate it, and thanks for the handover. I guess for me, I'd say for starters, fascinating presentation. I feel like as security professionals, we're consistently thrown kind of very specific technical details around threat intelligence. And I feel like your presentation did a great job of kind of taking that a step back and understanding the key political ideologies and the motives of the threat actors that are actually engaging in this. So great stuff. As John mentioned, I'm going to talk briefly about what we're doing here at Set Solutions with tabletop exercises. Let me share my presentation here. All right, so briefly, a little bit about me and my background. I got started with my career in information security in the Air Force. I'm a big fan of Python, and recent research work that I've done around CAPTCHA, working on building serverless malware and also working on multi-factor authentication bypass techniques. I actually did a talk a couple weeks ago at DEF CON on multi-factor authentication bypass. And currently working as the consulting services practice lead at Set Solutions. So we work on a lot of different assessment work, everything from threat hunting and incident response, vulnerability management, penetration testing and red teaming, and also our governance, risk, and compliance work. So what tabletop exercises are. For anybody that's not familiar, these have a long history of use in military. So anybody that does have a military background is probably familiar with the concept of tabletop exercises. But the idea is to take representatives from various different parts of an organization and bring them together in a single room, or as of recent, generally a Zoom call, as we have adapted our methodology for kind of a more remote COVID approach. But get representatives from each of the different groups and walk through a scenario, a hypothetical scenario that would be a significant event or a significant incident relevant to the entire business as a whole, and really get a sense of the different roles that everybody plays within the context of that event, how the interactions happen between the different departments. Because one thing that we frequently see with organizations is you'll have your different departments that operate in a silo, and then whenever something does happen, some big significant security event, often those organizations are not prepared for the level of interaction that's required in order to really address something at the company level. So what we do is we get everybody together and define who those participants are. And then once we've done that, we will step through, and usually this is a couple-day event, but we'll step through a hypothetical scenario, and just one per exercise. And this could be anything from a phishing campaign, a distributed denial of service, customer data breach. As John mentioned, this is one that is becoming especially relevant in the healthcare industry, because what we're seeing in the healthcare industry is, in response to COVID, there are a lot of different technical capabilities that are being rushed into production so that they can handle either surge capacity or maybe support new interactions with patients that minimize interaction and the likeliness of contamination. So all of these different solutions that really are, unfortunately, didn't have the time to put all of the security thought into it. And tabletop exercises are an excellent way of considering kind of the worst case scenario with those and understanding what you would do in order to respond to that. Now, the reason that tabletop exercises have a long history of military use is because it is an exceptional way to get your workforce to be able to respond to something that happens very quickly. Tabletop exercises are relevant for events where the stakes are high, where if response time isn't quick, then there's going to be considerable damage done to the organization. And so this is now why, of course, this is the reason why it's got a historical use in military, but it's also now the reason that we're seeing more and more organizations adopting this as an approach to assess their detective and response capabilities within cybersecurity, because similar to military operations, now in the cyber business world, there are events that can take place if you have a major incident that delays in response time of hours or even minutes at times can be extremely impactful and damaging to your organization. So real quick, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about when we do these tabletop exercises, there's really two key components to the tabletop exercise. The one is what my team, or whatever the team is that's hosting the tabletop exercise, uses as kind of a script for the exercise. And that's called the Master Scenarios Event List. And we kind of map out, prior to going into any of these exercises, exactly what's gonna happen. And then we facilitate the communication of that hypothetical scenario to the participants through something that we call injects. And these are basically just very specific events that happen within the storyline of that larger scenario or incident. And two different types of injects that we use throughout these tabletop exercises. One is scheduled injects. So this is predefined, these things are going to happen during the scenario. And they kind of define the high level story that the scenario is attempting to communicate. But we also have conditional injects, which really adds a new layer of authenticity to the tabletop exercise. And these conditional injects are basically small events that only occur if the participants take a specific action. So to clarify a little bit more, let's look at a couple examples of some possible injects that we could see within a tabletop exercise. So worth mentioning that these are modified periodicals, but so again, hypothetical, there wasn't actually a critical joint advisory from the NCSC and the NSA around a 0-day exploit exposure. But within the exercise, we can hypothesize such an event or simulate such an event happening. And really, this is a broader type of inject that isn't extremely specific to our organization. So when we bring up something like this, we're really looking at what are the preparedness steps that an organization is taking in order to be ready for such an event like this. So how are they tracking via threat intelligence ongoing major threats that are happening in the world? Now, we could also have some and generally do with most scenarios, have much more specific injects as well. So here's another example of a scheduled inject, but much more particular to a specific company. And here we used the name of the company, Dunder Mifflin, and basically emulated a situation where Krebs on Securities reported that they had a major password breach. And then we might also have a paste bin dump that shows the hashed passwords for the given organization. And when you get a specific inject like this, this is really where we want to start seeing conversations from the different participants around pulling in other components of the organization. So obviously management is going to have a big say with the direction that the organization goes with this, but because this is also a public exposure, there's also going to be questions around public relations, around regulatory compliance, and then obviously all of the technical details around what the internal organization should be doing if this was to actually occur as far as responding to this particular event. We also have more technically specific scheduled injects, such as the example here where we might give a log or a packet capture to an analyst and have them attempt to identify different components of that and use that in order to determine what next steps the organization should take. So in this example, we've got a situation where we have a backdoor that's placed on a domain controller. And this is the traditional util-man accessibility backdoor, where once it's installed on the system, a user only has to press the Windows key plus the U button, and it'll pop up a command prompt outside of the login session. So those are some examples of what we would see as far as scheduled injects. But again, where we really get to that additional depth of making it feel more real is through the conditional injects. So I've given some examples here of what we might be looking at when we do conditional injects. So on the left side, we've got a column that shows different conditions or different actions that the participants within the exercise might take. And then on the right side, we see what might be the resulting inject from that. So let's go back to the previous scheduled inject where we said that a domain controller was infected with a backdoor. Well, the analysts might discuss that based on the fact that they know that there has been some malicious activity on that domain controller, they might review that domain controller for other indicators of compromise. And as a result of such action, we may have a conditional inject that they discover some additional IOCs on that system, whether that's a volume shadow copy of extracted hashes from the NTDS file. Another example, the analyst then examines other systems for that same file signature. And of course, the conditional inject would be they then find it on another user's workstation. And now that we have a user in play instead of just a domain controller, they may review that user's email inbox and discover that there was a malicious email that was sent to the user. And then they could review the activity of the malware sample that was found within that malicious email and understand different features about that malware. So you can see that similar to the way it would happen in the real world, because we never go into an incident knowing everything that happened. Instead, you may have one single factor that alerts you to the fact that something has gone terribly wrong, but you don't have the whole story. And very similar to the way that we do in these tabletop exercises, you kind of have to work your way backwards, piecing together what little bits of information you have in order to understand the larger attack chain of what actually took place. And so that's really the type of activity that we try to emulate within these tabletop exercises is through these conditional injects. We allow the technical team to kind of piece together what took place and understand it at a bigger picture. But it's also worth saying that while we do have this technical depth to it, we also want to make sure that within any of these scenarios, there also is a level of business relevance too, that it's something that while there are very specific technical details, the decisions that are being made are critical to the success of the business. So another thing that we do within organizations is we kind of advance the maturity of these tabletop exercises as we work with organizations over time. In most cases, when you start tabletop exercises within your organizations, you're going to do it purely paper-based, which is a fully theoretical simulation. And it's just where we talk through these kind of paper-based injects. Now, we also do have the capability, and this is where once an organization is comfortable with that they have documented processes, we will start adding in actual technical artifacts in order to increase the complexity of these scenarios in what we might call a semi-live type tabletop exercise. And this is where we will add certain different instead of just giving somebody a log or something like that, we'll actually have them dig through, say, a packet capture or something like that in order to find IOCs or things that are happening. And the ideal situation is to get to a point where processes are so well defined from iterating through these different scenarios that we can come in with a full red team, unannounced red team assessment, execute these different tactics, techniques, and procedures in the real environment, and the response is immediate and the teams know exactly what to do. So that's the ultimate goal with these tabletop exercises, is really honing your detective and response capabilities. Again, when time to respond is critical, going through these scenarios and practicing them creates that knee-jerk response where organizations can go from everybody running around not sure of what to do to everybody knows exactly who to reach out to, who to connect with, what information goes from one department to another. And that improves their efficiency through not only defining the processes, but also through enhancing them as we go through these scenarios. So that covers it on the tabletop exercises and how we have kind of moved to using these in order to improve organizations' detective and response capabilities. So given that, I think we can move over to any questions that we have. So Michael.
Thanks, Hutch. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. So don't have anything in the Q&A, but I did receive an offline question around the tabletop exercises, how granular you can get as far as team sizes. What makes it more effective on team sizes? Does it need to be a large team, or can you do it in relatively small teams?
So you can do it in small teams. It really depends on the specific scenario and what you're trying to achieve. So with every single tabletop exercise, we try to outline beforehand what our objectives are, what teams we're really wanting to focus on, and then we custom tailor the scenario to that. So, and we don't have to limit these to just cyber either. We've also done tabletop exercises that are more around incident response and business continuity. But for some organizations, they just want to use tabletop exercises as an assessment of their technical security operations team. And so in those cases, those scenarios tend to be a lot more technical and kind of in the weeds, and are a lot of fun because those are also the ones where we can introduce kind of those capture the flag elements or even emulated threat activity within the environment. But other organizations find that it's much more useful to pull in kind of all of the different departments and personnel from those. And I think that there definitely is some benefit for that too, because you get those synergies between the different departments. So it really just depends on what the end goal is. I've done ones that are as few as 5 to 10 people, and I've done tabletop exercises where you have multiple rooms tiered together across Zoom calls. Well, this was pre-COVID. Now everybody's on their own Zoom call. But where you'd have maybe 40, 50 people involved in the tabletop exercise.
So anybody who's on, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A panel. I will say a question I've had, and this is probably a combination, John and Hutch. John, from a tabletop exercise standpoint, how important do you see intel such as what IronNet gathers as being or how important is that intel that you gather to building out effective tabletop exercises?
Yeah, so great question, Michael. It's actually very important, because at IronNet, as you know, like, we're able to see at a company, sector and nation level even, coordinated attacks that are occurring. And so when we look at that, if it's a healthcare institution or say an energy company, and we can see, attacks that are occurring across the sector, right? Regardless if they're hitting that individual entity, we can use that as those particular injects, as Hutch mentioned, and really walk through and say, here's your early warning sign to go through what we're seeing in the sector and better put yourself in a position to defend against it. The second thing that it does, candidly, and the ones that we've done, is it's shocking, and Hutch, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, but how much awareness it brings. So in addition to the process and understanding, that the technical side and the process, but it's how much awareness it really brings into the organization as to the types of scenarios that are out there.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And one thing that every organization that I've done these tabletop exercises with tends to come away with is the fact that in addition to the obvious benefits of tabletop exercises, it also, because everybody is in the same room interacting and executing on tasks that are unique to their department, it really spreads awareness within the organization of each team understanding better what the other teams do and where there's opportunities for synergy.
Good answers. Thank you for that. Do you have one question that came up? Larry Monto from Cottonwood is asking, how do you handle pushback for scheduling the meeting in non-regulated industries? So project timeline constraints often dictate meeting priorities, so a tabletop can be less than motivating to short-sighted stakeholders.
Yeah, unfortunately, that absolutely is a problem that you definitely encounter, because with a tabletop exercise, a lot of times you're trying to get people, oftentimes leadership roles as well, from different parts of the organization. So the reality is that without leadership support, it is very difficult to have a successful tabletop exercise program. I have seen some organizations that have success in it within a very siloed, like I said, just kind of if they're wanting to test their stock or something like that. But if you do want a broader tabletop exercise, then you really need that leadership support. And we tend to find that when organizations are contracting us for doing these tabletop exercises, there's obviously some interest in having the service done. So we tend to get that support that we need and the communication from leadership that this is a priority and that people do need to work their schedule around the tabletop exercise events.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is, in non-regulated entities, focus on your risk assessment, the key risks that the industry that you're in is seeing. And again, to Hutch's point, you do need executive support. But if you can highlight the risk that you believe your firm is taking on now, and as a means of getting broad acceptance on how to remediate that risk, a tabletop exercise, goes much further and deeper than your traditional risk assessment.
Yeah, I think that was key to the question of being a non-regulated industry. When it's hard to motivate based on having to meet some type of kind of the carrot and stick approach. That's a big stick if you're regulated, but if you're not regulated, then the carrot kind of has to be maybe going in pre-tabletop exercise and explaining, just like what you're talking about, John and Hutch, saying what are your risks in this particular industry specifically, and if you can bring the intel into it to the previous question I had, then maybe that can help prove the point, and you can get that executive support early on.
I'd say also, as far as getting participants really engaged, I think a lot of it is approach. I've been in a couple different where I was a participant in certain tabletop exercises, and there was kind of a lack of interaction, and there wasn't a host that really made a point to engage everybody. And I think getting people engaged, really making it enjoyable from kind of almost a gamification approach is really helpful for getting interest from participants as well.
Yep. So we have another question. Darren is asking, how often do you recommend going through a tabletop, annually or biannually? Or anything else?
Yeah, so it depends on the risk appetite and what the organization wants to do. I think I've seen everything from once a year down to once every quarter. I think any more than that would be excessive, but and for some organizations, once a quarter is probably excessive, but it just really depends on how, and I think a lot of it's return on investment and getting a feel for what kind of value you're getting out of them. And as long as you're continuing to get value out of them, then I think it's.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen in, the larger enterprises, annual is common. But then you have a scenario like COVID come up, and that might flip the bit on a scenario, based approach that you didn't encounter before, and it may challenge how you look at that. So, I think there has to be a cadence there. Hurting all of those people sometimes in the larger companies is difficult. But I would say, annually is probably a good cadence, right up until you have a scenario that really changes the way we operate, and then, consideration beyond that.
Yeah, and I think also what I've seen some organizations do is they'll do the larger tabletop exercises that pull in the other business groups less frequently, so maybe once a year or once every couple of years. And then for the easier ones to schedule, the ones that are kind of more focused on the security operations group or very specific niche groups that's easier to get them all in the room at the same time, they may do those more frequently.
So a question came up, have you used or looked at the backdoors and breaches game from Black Hills InfoSec? I have seen that in conferences before where it's more like a card game, if I remember correctly, and they handed them out. So any kind of gamification on something like that to make it fun, a little more engaging, I think is always important.
Yep, I'm not familiar with that one specifically. I do like Black Hills Security. I think they come up with some fantastic stuff. But we do have different platforms that we use as far as kind of gamification and introducing different CTF flags, especially for the ones that are more specific to the technical audience.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great concept.
Yeah, he did confirm it's a D&D style card game to simulate tabletop exercise. I do remember them giving them away at DerbyCon a couple of years ago when DerbyCon was still a thing, and they went extremely quickly. So the other question I had was, and John, you brought it up in our final few minutes here. I'll ask this. You brought it up earlier where you said the table, or the, not tabletop, but the COVID scenario has kind of flipped the bid or flipped the script, however you want to say it, on how often we hold these. Does it also stand to reason, possibly, without asking you to look into your crystal ball too much, whether or not we will, this will lead organizations to try to even look for more different kind of scenarios to try to predict some really weird scenarios that they hadn't thought of, pandemic kind of being one of them?
Yeah, if you bought into the concept of the Black Swan, there's a great book written called The Black Swan about unpredictable events. And generally what you find is that they're unpredictable only to the people that they're executed on, to others that they're predictable. I do. I mean, I wouldn't want to put an organization into a frenzy, but we have to, again, there's the saying, failure of imagination, right? We have to consider that the game has changed, right? That the world has changed quite a bit. And, we have to consider some of those events that we would never, may have thought about before from a cyber perspective, right? And I also think we have to consider, in that same vein, how companies and sectors feel they are in a position to really defend themselves going forward should that type of an event occur, right? I mean, what's pretty clear is, going it alone is not working, and we've come a long way with sharing information. I'd like to see some more creativity as going forward on how do we band together and really, defend effectively together, right? And look at the scenarios that would bring, as opposed to an individual organization, right? So how would the energy sector, an attack on one company in the energy sector dictates an attack on others, right? And so how does the sector solve for that equation? And look at the scenarios related to that, I think would be a very good thing for them to do.
All right, well, we're reaching the end here. So thank you everybody for your questions. Really do appreciate it. Thanks for the time, John and Hutch. Appreciate you presenting. This has been a great discussion, great presentation. Really do appreciate it. Everybody, again, if you did not get your gift cards, please let Lauren know. We will be sending out a questionnaire. You will be entered into a $100 Amazon gift card, or chance to win that. If you answer that questionnaire, they're really good odds that you can win that. So please answer that. Along with that, we should be sending the video recording link of this and any other relevant links that we will have. maybe even some links to some stuff Hutch has done as well that he talked about earlier, which is MFA, bypass, that kind of thing. So again, appreciate you joining, and everybody have a good rest of your day. See you on the next one.
Michael. Thanks, Hutch. Thanks, everybody.